I have the pleasure of working across our programs and research team on all of the different issues related to AI social impact that we tackle as an organization. That also means that I get the pleasure of working with and learning from wonderful people like the panelists we have on stage for this session today. The session is going to be focused on multi-stakeholderism and the importance of including a diversity of voices, sectors, perspectives in determining the trajectory of AI, and also the role that philanthropy can play and already is playing in order to make that happen as productively as possible. Also, thank you for coming back from lunch. I know the food was good, and you probably had alternatives, so it's great to see you all again. So just to tee up this panel briefly, when we're thinking about issues at a societal scale, it's a part of our DNA as an organization to recognize each of our individual limitations and organizational limitations, at being able to see everything, anything, and anyone across all of the different impacts that AI can have. A technical person may not have as strong of a social lens. Somebody who's coming from a community may not have the technical expertise. But it's very much our belief as an organization that when you bring those people into the same room, that they both become subject matter experts in ways that are extremely important and relevant. And that's a model for all of us to be able to find powerful paths forward in steering these technologies in a way that ultimately produces beneficial outcomes for society. And so with that, I will introduce our panelists here. We have Andrea Dehlendorf, who's a senior advisor to the Athena Coalition and a co-founder of United for Respect, a workers' rights organization. We have Gemma Clavell from Ethicus, which is an algorithmic auditing organization, and Andy Parsons from Adobe, which I think you probably all have already heard of. The other thing I'll say about this group is that they cover a number of different issues, and they also wear many different hats. So I've introduced them with a single affiliation organizationally, but I think each of them could probably give you a laundry list. And so with that, I will turn it over to Andrea with the prompt to please introduce yourself, and then also say a little bit about the role that you think multi-stakeholderism can play in beneficially steering AI.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. I'm Andrea Dehlendorf. I've been a labor organizer, campaigner, and leader for about 30 years now, working largely with people in low-wage service sector jobs, ranging from dishwashers and guest room attendants in Las Vegas casinos to janitors cleaning tech campuses in the Silicon Valley to Amazon cashiers and Amazon warehouse workers. And through that work, I've seen firsthand the impacts of technology impacts that technology is having on workers. And I joined a few years ago the steering committee for PAI's labor and economy work stream because again, I had seen those impacts and seen that on the one hand, technology sometimes can make people's jobs easier, more efficient, and safer. Most of the time, if we're honest, technology and AI particularly that's being deployed in workplaces is by automated and algorithmic management and disciplinary systems focused on extracting just a little bit more extra productivity out of workers. And very, very rarely are we seeing pay increase and the workload decrease. And we know a lot right now about the harms, and I think we hear a lot of exciting and aspirational speculation about what the benefits might be, but those aren't actually happening and playing out right now for the most part for workers. So PAI and the work that I've participated in is important to me because I just think it's essential that workers' lives, the working conditions, and the economy overall is being reshaped, and therefore workers should be at the table to participate in setting the guardrails, having the conversations, and let me clarify, they should be at the table to be part of the conversations, to set the frameworks and the principles, and ultimately, they also need to be at the table to shape the policies, the regulations, and to really co-govern to make sure that technology is actually serving shared prosperity broadly. We see this happening in some instances right now with collective bargaining. I think we all saw the tremendous impact that the SAG-AFTRA and Writers Guild strikes had around really carving new ground for how to deal with generative AI in the creative fields. And then, I could do a whole laundry list, but we'll mention one other. NFL, you might not know, has bargained around the rights of players to own the data that is collected through biometric sensors that are working. So there's some exciting things happening happening there, but unions only have 10% right now of representation, so there's limits to what that is done in the United States. And there are a lot of regulatory and policy conversations as well, but it's also critical to be a part of conversations like these. In order to do that meaningfully, however, we need more worker organizations, and we need stronger worker organizations to have that participation be meaningful. And while I'm here talking about workers, because that's my experience and expertise, we all know that everybody is being impacted and everybody's lives are being changed, every human and every community. And that means we need to be thinking about, if we're serious and continue to have an aspiration for a democracy, which I think we could all agree is somewhat in peril right now, that we need to bring organizations of people and communities into this conversation in a meaningful way around how AI is being developed and deployed. So yes, we need multi-stakeholder initiatives like PAI with resources and capacity, but to make it to make it meaningful, we also need the organizations that are at the table to be robust, to be resourced, to have the experience, and to have the capacity to be able to participate meaningfully. And we have to be very clear-eyed about the asymmetries of power at play, right? This cannot just be about, what is the janitor who cleans the building's opinion about a technology, but rather who are the organizations that work with, that represent and organize that janitor, and how are they at the table to figure out and to have an equitable voice in what happens. So to make it real, people need to be resourced. I really encourage Philanthropy to really think about investing in civil society, worker organizations, community organizations. That includes parents, students, people who use public services, people whose communities are being policed by AI and technologies, youth who are inheriting the climate, because I think we have to consider the energy impacts that AI technologies are having as a constituency as well. So all of these groups need to be brought in. Lastly, I'll just say, technological change is nothing new, and how it plays out is not inevitable. It is a set of choices that we make as a society, and those choices have to be made by a broader community of people with strong and robust organizations who can be meaningfully at the table. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that call to action, Andrea. Gemma, I will hand over to you with the same prompt. Would love to hear more about you, your work, your organization, and also what have you seen in terms of multi-stakeholderism's value in that space, and also some of the challenges, if you've encountered any.
Totally. First, thanks for the session. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for the day. Thanks, PAI. You're all amazing. So I'm the CEO of a tech startup, but until a year ago, I was the ED of a nonprofit. And actually, the tech startup is a spin-off of the nonprofit that continues to exist with less of me these days. So it's the Ethicus Foundation, and we created Ethicus AI. And we've been able to innovate because we started working a long time ago. We've existed for 12 years as a nonprofit with the communities impacted by AI decisions. One of the things that we saw a long time ago was that if we wanted to activate the capacity of existing third sector organizations to defend and protect their constituencies, they needed to understand what the technological impacts on their constituencies were. And we found that doing trainings was not quite cutting it. Like it was too high level, they didn't understand how it impacted them. So we started thinking, how can we train these long established organizations that are defending workers' rights or the rights of people with disabilities or any other thing, how can we empower them to incorporate the technological element? Then we thought, why don't we work with them to reverse engineer the systems that impact them? And that's what we did. So 8 years ago, we started doing what we called back then adversarial audits. So we would team up with these organizations and reverse engineer the systems that were impacting them. So we worked with women victims of domestic violence whose risk when they go to the police is assigned by an algorithm. We worked with inmates when AI is being used in sentencing or recidivism assessment. We worked with people with Down syndrome to measure how facial recognition is impacting them and their life chances. We're now working on emotion recognition and the blind. We've worked with workers using ride-hailing apps to also see how their labor rights are being taken into account in technical specifications. And what we found in those process of collectively building with them a socio-technical approach to how these systems work, because oftentimes when you do an adversarial audit, you don't have access to the system. And so we had to come up with data to still do the adversarial audit. And oftentimes what we did was build the data, both at the technical level by scraping data, doing sock puppeting, but also just talking to people affected and just building databases of what actually happened to them when they went through an automated process. What we found in those adversarial audits was that our results were at odds with the results of the engineers. And so we would identify bias, and they were like, oh no, we've done all these tests. There's no bias. We're like, well, there's something wrong with your tests because there's actually bias and inefficiency. Your system is not doing what it's supposed to do. Like, it even went beyond bias oftentimes. And then we identified the crucial problem, which is now what we're solving with Ethica's AI through building software. Engineers only test for model metrics. And that's great, but not enough. It's like you're a pharmaceutical company and you only do tests before, and you don't do clinical trials. So you can have great data, but you're only measuring efficacy, not effectiveness. And interestingly, engineers don't have the capacity to measure real impacts. They can measure predicted outcomes, but not recorded outcomes, because that requires quantitative social scientists, methodologists. And so we're kind of bringing that into the conversation and saying, that's great that you do all your testing and all your prompt engineering, but you need the personas that are going to be using those systems. You need to be able to understand how, once the system is launched, how people are going to use it and then monitor how people actually use it. And so that's what we're doing right now. But we wouldn't be here if we hadn't had that collaboration that we continue to do. We continue to do pro bono adversarial audits together with civil society. But it was that understanding of how are people impacted in real life by these systems that got us to realize that there's something fundamentally wrong in how we test these systems for safety and bias. And now we have a platform that engineers can use and have input as to how their system will work in the wild, in real life settings, and then reincorporate all that data and metrics into how they design AI. And I really think that we're onto something really big. Like, there's no future for AI unless AI is able to capture real life in the wild metrics and incorporate them in product design. This is not a compliance issue. This is a product design issue. When you do clinical trials, what you learn goes back into making vaccines better. It's not just a document that goes to a regulator. I think we need to start thinking like lots of other domains are thinking about safety and ensuring that real life testing is something that must be done before and while an AI system is in operation. Thank you so much.
Gemma, thank you so much for that breakout of the ecosystem and all of the different ways that not just multi-stakeholderism, but also multi-sectorism, and I think I just invented a word. You heard it here first. And also multidisciplinary work is just so critical in thinking through AI's impacts and ensuring that they're positive. Andy, I'm guessing this has a lot of echoes for you in what you've seen, thinking through some of the synthetic media universe that you've been working in and content provenance and authenticity. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I was debating in my mind, listening to you two give your intros, whether it's good to be third on this panel or first. I think in either case, I'm going to give shorter answers because I'm learning a lot sitting here today. I'm Andy Parsons from Adobe. I sort of wear two hats in my role at Adobe as Senior Director of Engineering. Before I get into the specifics of what I do, I want to compliment Gemma for calling out that engineers have certain kinds of challenges. And I think one of the things that PAI and multi-sectorism lens brings to the table is the ability to expand the thinking of engineers. It's the case for sure, and I'm sure many of you have come to the same rather obvious conclusion that in the area of AI, transparency, understanding, explainability, the technical problems are sort of easy or seductively easy to solve. It's the sociology, anthropology, and philosophy. I have some skin in the game because my daughter is a philosophy major in university right now. And 3 years ago, I wondered, that's cool, we're very supportive parents, privileged to be able to support her, but I wonder what she would actually do with that philosophy degree. I've come full circle, or 180 degrees, and I feel like we need the philosophers and anthropologists and sociologists to help us engineers understand how to do what we need to do. It's not a matter of doing the right thing or wanting to do the right thing. It's like asking someone, do you want to preserve democracy? The answer is yes. Getting product teams to develop things in a way that actually supports that in a meaningful way that is not wasteful of resources is the hard part, frankly. So in my role at Adobe, I try to bridge the easy part, the technology, with the hard part to the best of my ability. I mentioned I wear two hats. So I joined Adobe a few years ago to work on something called the Content Authenticity Initiative, or the CAI. Its function has been steadfast in providing a level of transparency, and you can think of the idea as a technologically driven, cryptographically verifiable nutrition label for digital content. So in the spirit of preserving democratic discourse, and I'd go so far as to say, considering a basic human right to understand what content is, and in this world that means, is this fully generated by AI? If so, what AI and what ingredients were used to make that particular model? Is this a photograph? I think sometimes AI transparency and labeling is a little bit of a red herring. What really matters in this world we're entering, or perhaps in, where 90+% of the content you experience, audio, video, multimodal, Apple Vision Pro images, 90+% of that imagery and media will be fully AI generated or partially AI manipulated. So we do have to fulfill a basic right to understand what that content is, where it came from, in cases where it's sensible, who made it, and moreover, and above and beyond all that, make sure that we don't put too much responsibility on the information consumer to figure this out, right? As an information consumer, I can't be expected to be a forensics expert or to make sense of a litany of details about a nutrition label, but to find non-judgmental ways to achieve a level of transparency so we can know what things are and make trust decisions for ourselves. And in most cases, that doesn't require anything to any details about the photographer or the publisher or anything else. It's really, as Sam Greger, I see out there, has often characterized it, understanding the how, like how things are made, what this actually is, and not necessarily the who. So at Adobe, I work on getting those tools of transparency into tools like Photoshop. We make Photoshop. We didn't make Photoshop a verb, but we do make the product Photoshop. I understand even Kate Middleton uses our tools. Allegedly. Thank you. I think Adobe is a great place to do this work because this is not a business for us. I think we have gained a lot of thought leadership and goodwill in the technology community, but really this is something that at the highest level of executive leadership at Adobe, we think needs to exist. It's not an Adobe product by any means. Everything we do is done in the open source. The second hat I wear, in addition to being privileged to sit on the PAI Media Integrity Steering Committee, is to provide some leadership in the C2PA, which is a standards organization we founded about 3 years ago now. This is a Linux Foundation organization under the Joint Development Foundation. The standard for content transparency, called Content Credentials, is fast-tracked for an ISO standard, hopefully this year, fingers crossed. And there I'm learning a lot about what multi-stakeholder collaboration looks like across technology companies, private sector, civil society, and other places. And once again, underscoring this idea that only with true multi-sector, I can't get that fabricated word out of my mind, multi-stakeholder convenings, and a place to do that with transparency, frankness, candor, like PAI has fostered, can we really educate our legislators, civil society folks about what the technology is capable of and not, and try not to be dismissive of new innovative ideas, but also educate the people who think they have innovative ideas, sometimes me and engineers, that we're really sometimes solving the easy technological problems. And as engineers, we want to walk into a room, solve a problem, and walk out of the room. And I'll finish by saying that is not the case with these AI problems. They're fraught, they're difficult. I am not a doomsday person. I'm actually a techno-optimist, I guess is the current word. But I think we have to do constant work and be very focused and work together. And I'm happy that PAI fosters that kind of collaboration. I think it's critical.
Yeah, thank you so much for those comments, Andy, and for the shout out to the Synthetic Media Framework and the work that we're doing in our Media Integrity Program. For those who are curious to learn more, we actually just released a set of case studies on the outcomes of that framework's impact within the sector. over the course of the last year with the foundational partners who signed up to give this a shot with us and report back what they found. Adobe is one of those fantastic partners. Witness, with Sam Gregory in the audience, is one of those fantastic partners. The lights here are very bright, so I'm sorry if there's somebody else I can't see in this audience who is also on that list. But hopefully it's a set of useful illustrations as we're all thinking through a brave new frontier when it comes to synthetic content, its realism, and the impact it has on our information ecosystem. So Andy, apologies, but I'm not going to put you first on this one. I'm going to put you second and see how you feel on that, about that order. I'm going to go back to Andrea's first. Because I think you probably have some interesting things to share with us when it comes to thinking through not just how can multi-stakeholderism help us scale socially beneficial AI, which I think is one part of how we think about this issue, but also how do we scale the multi-stakeholderism itself as we're thinking through the sort of design, the implementation, the deployment of AI systems. Sort of two sides of a coin there, thinking about the amplification of the approach, the amplification of impact, and also the recognition that multi-stakeholderism is hard and takes a lot of time and frequently, is something that in order to do it right, you need to move more slowly than sometimes the social impact that you're seeking out that you would want to move as quickly as you could, but recognize you don't want to leave people behind.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on this. One is that first of all, when we're thinking about tech for good and opportunities, I do think that we sometimes the conversation is around what can we build for people. And the question I would have back if we're going to be meaningfully committed to multi-stakeholderism is how are we actually building and responding to a vision that communities are building for themselves around how they want technology to be of service and of value to them, so that that is part of the approach on tech for good, as well as bringing people who are most impacted by the harms into analyzing and exposing and figuring out where things just need to not get built or deployed, and then also reshaping them. So I think there's really two dimensions of that. I think it's complicated because it does take more time to do that. And sometimes there might be a lot of really smart, really well-intentioned people who are ready to figure something out, but the step hasn't happened to really figure out who are communities whose vision and agenda should also be considered, and for whom the harms need to also be considered. And I think it's challenging because we do not have a robust civil society movement that is engaged on these big questions, because often technology is coming in a way that is not necessarily visible or explicit or the most immediate frontline need for people, right? So there is, to your point, Gemma, some sort of catch up and work that needs to happen to support people and connecting the dots between their lived experience, how technology is playing out, to be able to do that. And again, I think that's why it's really critical to make the investment in that capacity and building that expertise is a really key piece of this. I do think that the strategy needs to be a bit surgical, right? Where there is a particular opportunity, how do we very specifically identify who are the people whose vision and analysis of the impacts will be most valuable? How do we bring them in and then use that to set a pattern that we can then expand out to have more reach, right? Because, I mean, again, this affects everybody and all people. We're not set up as a society to have just a massive people's assembly to figure out all these questions, right? So we have to figure out what are the steps, and then how do we build and scale on those steps in a meaningful way. So maybe there'll be more opportunities with questions to say more, but those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the point that you just made about thinking through sort of community-driven AI and ensuring that, to the point of one of the earlier speakers, that we're beginning with a sort of problem or a sort of identification of the right set of questions before we start to identify what tools might be useful. Andy, I'd love to bring you in to share a little bit more about the different challenges that you've tackled sort of using this multi-stakeholder approach, and also using the sort of idea of bringing in lots of different voices to be able to better understand some of the issues that you've wrangled with at Adobe and also within the content provenance work that you've been leading.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to answer that question. I mean, I'll riff off of something I said initially about sort of technologists, civil society, and other kinds of expertise. Ultimately, I'll also echo something Andrew said. The idea that you can't open up a massive public discourse to absolutely everyone, it's just not possible. I think we all, as technologists and philosophers and all the other disciplines, have to contend with the fact that we need to move fast, right? To one extent or another, many of us live in capitalistic societies, and there's this old trope idea that's somewhat true, which is like, if we don't do it, the bad guys will, or if we don't do it, our competitor will, therefore we have to do it. And that often leads to, let's do things in haste, get them to market in haste, and hope for the best, and figure out the problems afterwards. I think you can maybe figure out some degree of the problem afterwards and deploy countermeasures without multi-stakeholder organizations, because you're at reputational risk, you're VC investors. And by the way, I am a capitalist and I have run many startups, so I don't want to impugn capitalism or venture capitalists by any means. But the motivations to fix things after damage has been done, I think we see this countless examples every day with some folks who are considered either non-ethical deployers of AI technology or moving really in haste to their own and our peril. They don't consider what work should be done up front. And the idea to do work up front with a certain velocity sometimes runs counter to deploying technologies for capitalistic reasons. I think we can only address that with multi-stakeholder abilities to convene, where representatives of very different groups as proxies for those groups can come to the table and say, this is not only my opinion, but I represent a constituency, almost like a democracy. I'm here because what we share at the table across multiple disciplines, multiple companies, multiple organizations, NGOs, is the feeling of urgency to solve this problem. But we address that urgency in very different ways. And these are things that I, as a technologist, or somebody working for a public company, cannot address. I just don't have that knowledge. But I can be impactful in different ways, and I represent a certain constituency as well as Adobe users who pay for Creative Cloud and make better edits than Kate Middleton, perhaps. I'll stop with that. But are using AI tools increasingly. The idea that a rising tide raises all boats, all artists. I think that's still speculative, right? Understanding what the impact is to the workforce in creativity, which is our bread and butter, of course, at Adobe, is something that's playing out before our eyes. So someone like me or my colleague can represent the concerns of artists, but perhaps not as credibly the concerns of people trying to live their lives in conflict regions, where we need civil society and others to proxy for those underrepresented groups and say, here are the actual problems. Like, privacy is a major problem. The C2PA spec has to grow up and understand all of these different constituencies. And then to have someone, representing each of those in a multi-stakeholder convening who can, do that skill that everybody wants on their LinkedIn resume that says, I can speak technology ease, and I can speak to multiple different kinds of people with different disciplines. And I think finding those people on our own as companies and NGOs and others is difficult. So we need lightning rod organizations, again, like PAI. There are many. PAI is one among them, who can bring folks together who have that skill set to talk to different kinds of disciplinary groups, and also bring as proxy the interests of their various constituents. There are many, many gnarly problems facing us, and I'm under no belief that when we solve the first set, there won't be a whole bunch of even more gnarly ones coming behind it, because I think we're still projecting the negative outcomes and the positive outcomes of AI. We're saying, no, AI isn't bad. Here's one example. AI is terrible. Here's an example of misinformation. I was having a hallway conversation just a few moments ago. People are saying this is maybe the AI election year with 50+ elections worldwide, billions of people going to the polls. The counter argument is like, well, have we really seen the impact of synthetic media and deceptive media that's very sophisticated, photorealistic yet? Sure, we have the Joe Biden robocall. My concern, and many of your concern that I was speaking with earlier, is that those sort of publicly visible things that rise above the waterline are easy to talk about, definitely perilous, but we should worry about all the cases that we don't hear about, right? A couple of years ago, it was like, are these photos of this politician actually realistic? I'm like, no, those are not, but what about the ones that you don't recognize as fake, right? What about the ability that's keeping pace with the sophistication of AI tools and the democratization and freeness of open tools that allows people to make very convincing deepfakes that you'll never hear about, right? Because they're so good, and if you're a state-run actor, you might deploy disinformation in places that it's not very visible, right? That's certainly what you might consider doing if you really want to change the way people are thinking. So I think we have the beginnings of an understanding of the problem space, the very nascent understanding of what we can do about it. And with multi-stakeholder convenings, we can try to slow the pace a little bit to do things thoughtfully rather than in haste.
Fantastic. Appreciate that royally insightful answer.
Touché.
Gemma, would love to hear your thoughts about, given the folks that we have in the room, given the work and all of the insights and relationships and knowledge and expertise, among other things that they bring in from philanthropy, how can philanthropy be thinking about the role it plays within this multi-stakeholder landscape? And where can they sort of get involved for the highest leverage based on what you've seen?
Love this question. But let me start with something else, because we've been talking about engineers. Saying that engineers cannot code a world that they don't understand or that they have challenges is not a criticism. All of us have limitations in our trade. It's like you can be a great plumber, but a plumber alone cannot build a building. A plumber can be a great part of the team that builds a building, but then you need the architects and the painters and lots of other people. I think it's the same thing. As AI gets into high-risk scenarios, we need the teams. And so engineers can be the best engineers, like the best plumbers, but unless they're also the best at communicating with the other trades, that will make sure that that building of data is going to be built and it's going to be safe, it's not going to fall on people. We need to make sure that we promote those kind of profiles. So again, it's not engineers need to do more. They just need to learn to talk to others. And others, social scientists, we also need to learn to talk to engineers. I certainly struggled with my own people, getting them to understand why engaging with engineers is important. So like after saying that, because I really don't want to criticize engineers, because I think they're part of the solution. On philanthropy. So as I said before, we were a nonprofit, and now we're a tech startup. One of the things that really struck me about this journey, I never wanted to be a tech startup. I moved here because I felt that while working in Europe and Latin America, we couldn't get the support that we needed to do our work. And I felt that in the US, maybe we could get more support. So I came here to promote and expand the nonprofit. But basically when I got here, a super angel round pretty much came to me. And so several executives at Meta, Microsoft, Sage just got together and said, we think that you're really onto something, and so we'd like to fund you as a software developer. And so we started with doing this. But I think that's a reflection on some of the shortcomings of existing philanthropy and the ability to work, to support this technical work. So I think that one of the first challenges is kind of get out of the end of the pipe trap, where we're just working with the communities once they've been harmed, and you make sure that the harm is less on them and that they have support systems. Well, what about avoiding the harm in the first place? But if the harm comes from a technical decision, we don't really have the tools. There's no support from philanthropy, or very little support, on how do we intervene in the upstream where those decisions are being made. So the first thing that I would say is we need to get out of this end of the pipe trap. But also, I think that philanthropy needs to develop its own voice. Oftentimes, philanthropy ends up being very much of a follower of what others say. And so you have philanthropists working with communities directly, and then philanthropists kind of reproducing what Silicon Valley does, but with better intentions, not necessarily better technical practices. And no one works to build better AI. So either we just build more AI, or we work with the communities impacted by AI. But what about building better AI so that those communities have better impacts, and so that those engineers learn how to work with others? That middle space is really not covered. And I think that the story of Ethica's AI is a good reflection of those gaps in the philanthropy work. So I think that there's a need to create that space to build and to promote and to fund those that are working on better AI, and in that socio-technical space of understanding how AI works and impacts on people. And also, I think that philanthropy needs to lead in incorporating the responsible AI solutions. Like, I think it's just incredible that we don't have all these huge foundations being like, okay, I'm going to use AI in hiring, but I'm not going to do it well. I want to make sure that I'm not biased in making my decisions. I'm going to use AI in marketing. I'm going to use AI in text generation. I'm going to use ChatGPT. What are the precautions that I need to take into account? Why are you not our testing ground for doing this? And I just, again, there isn't a conversation about this, and if I go to your websites, I don't find a way to start that conversation. So I think that there's a lot to do, and I think that philanthropy can really be transformational at this stage in making sure that big tech gets the message, and that the ones that are trying to build tech for a better world, better tech for a better world, are also supported for doing that. So kind of bring all your legacy that you have in protecting people, but make sure that you complement that with the new tools and the new teams of people that really want to make sure that they work towards better social outcomes and not just profit.
Fantastic provocation, Gemma. And I did tell the panel to be provocative. So if you're hearing anything where you're like, I haven't heard that before, or maybe the lights are bright on me as well, that was by design. I think we have some time for audience questions. So while you all are getting those questions ready to go, I'm going to give Andrea and Andy a last opportunity to chime in with their provocative or hot takes on if you could name 1 to 2 things that philanthropy really should be doing right now in the AI space, what would you suggest?
So I'll say resource worker and community organizations to build an agenda for what their claims are on how technology and AI should come into their lives, and create real pathways, as you said, on the front end to be able to analyze and look at the harms and be very clear on what they need. And I want to just say one thing about this, which is that it will be uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to have an organized community make a claim on something that's very important to you and that you've invested in. But that is how all social progress has been through some tension and some discomfort of organized communities making claims. And we just cannot fear it because it is a necessary piece of what is needed to set the right social course for this.
Andy, over to you. 60 seconds to close us out before the Q&A.
Well, it's all a hot take because we only met yesterday for the first time. So, but this is something we think about a lot. I think the tech industry owes the philanthropists among us clear steps. So thank you for the question. Like, not just fund a general area, but do something very specific. Look for these kinds of projects, because I know, left to your own devices, philanthropy organizations often spin up their own hackathons and look to solicit projects. But I think a very clear lead, not a follower role, is critical here. And the tech industry owes you all some very specific things that we're striving to attain that public companies, private companies can't always do. And one of those is research on the impact of disinformation and synthetic media on real users. I think that this area is most nascent of all, and without real on-the-ground research, which will be equally uncomfortable, about what works in terms of transparency, what is too much responsibility to put on a user to understand what they're looking at, hearing, et cetera, and how to protect them while also allowing people to make their own trust decisions, because after all, trust is between people and organizations, not between cell phones and AI-trained machines. And I don't think as an industry or a society or democracies, we understand that nearly well enough. And yet, as I said before, we forge ahead with technologies to solve problems without fully understanding the problems that we are giving birth to. So research for real information consumers would be my answer.
Excellent. All right, we are on to audience Q&A. If you would like to ask any of our panelists a question or throw something to the panel in general, we can throw a mic to you. Stand up and give us your name and your affiliation, because we'd love to hear where you're coming from also. Caitlin needs softball practice. She hasn't played since middle school. Come on, there must be someone to throw a mic to. Back corner, please.
Okay, we're going to do it.
Nice.
Steve Plank, Annie E. Casey Foundation, but with the stipulation, I'm not actually speaking on behalf of Casey. I'm speaking on behalf of Steve. So I've been in philanthropy, 2.5 years, which makes me an immigrant, a newcomer exploring this land. You all were provocative, so let me bounce a couple things back to you. Gemma, why perhaps are philanthropy organizations going somewhat slowly using AI being a testing ground in HR, in hiring, in managing our endowments, in grants management. To whom do we give grants? What are we learning from the grantees? Quite honestly, we're all learners in this space. We have a generative AI policy. It took us 4 months to write it, but we have a decent one and our staff use it. But we're all scared and confused about where do our data go. We have kind of tiers of public, private, proprietary information, but we're not at all confident about where the data goes and are we giving up ownership of it. So there's a very direct answer to that. And philanthropy, this is not to be negative or argumentative, but we're not a monolith. The origin stories, the sources of wealth, the cultures and missions of different organizations, so very different. And definitely notice that a whole bunch of large philanthropies present day are tech money, but others of us are like old industrialists or package delivery companies or something else. So the fact that we're not a monolith is going to present some challenges to staking out a ground or speaking with a unified voice. That wasn't a question, but feel free to respond if you wish.
Any takers on the panel for Steve's question / statement?
I'll offer a comment or two, just very briefly. I think, in a 30-minute panel, it's hard not to generalize. So I concede that there's some generalization going on, certainly on my part, about characterizing philanthropists. But you raise a great point about the origin stories. In the spirit of being provocative, in terms of using AI, certainly using AI and generative tools is a good way to learn about them. But I would throw a question back to you: do you need AI to do the work you do around grant writing and all the things you mentioned? Is there really an urgency there?
I don't know. The best advice I've gotten in the last 3 months, and it was repeated earlier today, think of the problem you're trying to solve and ask whether AI can help. Don't say, what can AI do? Ooh, I should use that.
That's what I was about to say, so maybe less provocative.
I think one of the challenges of philanthropy, and the philanthropy that I know, and I don't know tech philanthropy because I've never been benefited by its favors. So I'm more familiar with like family large funds, which are the ones that fund initiatives in Europe and Latin America, where I come from, even though I'm based here. One of the crucial things that I think philanthropists can do and need to do is make sure that we don't ever forget what do we optimize for. And what is technology for? More than what's the problem. I was talking before about we were asked by the German government on the foundation side to help them on a landslide prediction system. And they wanted us to audit it and to see whether there could be problems with it. And what we found is that the system worked well. The problem was that the country had no resources to actually help anyone in case of a landslide. So what's the point of telling people you're going to die in 5 minutes if there's nothing you can do? And what's interesting about this is that what the tech team was asking is, are we predicting landslide well? And they were predicting landslides well, but are we protecting the population? And when you change the question, then whether you predict landslides well is only part of the equation. There's a lot of other things that come into play, like what are our ability to respond to the threat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So being able to remember what do you optimize for? And philanthropists have the privilege to optimize for social good, which not a lot of actors in this world have the privilege to do this. So you can bring that onto the table. Tech companies don't have that privilege. They need to optimize for profit or the predicted the outcomes of a system. You can optimize for social good, and you need to bring that onto the table all the freaking time. I was going to say all the time. I have an accent. I'm not a native speaker, so sometimes I say things that I shouldn't say. But you should always bring that to the table. And I think that's such a privilege for philanthropy. Just don't forget that. What do you optimize for? Social good.
I just have, I can hold it.
All right, so we've got a question in the back left, but I also just want to lift up part of that exchange that I love so much is the idea that philanthropy really is in a position where it can help define that positive future, that positive vision, using the values that you all bring to your work every day. I think that's such a critical part of the ecosystem and such a critical part of the solution, and I'm just glad that exchange happened. All right, back left.
Hi there, I'm Chantal Forster with the Technology Association of Grantmakers. And so the organization is an association of foundations throughout the world representing somewhere between 350 and 400 grantmakers throughout the US, the EU, and the UK. In late November, we conducted some interesting research with our members to find out, where are you using AI? And here's what we know as of November, December. About 58% of grant makers were using AI for note-taking, for authoring, using OpenAI or generative AI to create, summarize, etc. And then the usages go down from there. What we saw, a lower uptake in using Gen AI to explore a theory of change or identify gaps in a theory of change, to examine historical grant-making records, to unearth patterns or perhaps gaps. We're not seeing foundations use it to predict their own biases yet. I think that's a growth area. But what I want to ask you, because there's a challenge, and I want to name the challenge and then ask you what we could do about it. The challenge is the lack of the multidisciplinary approach, Stephanie, that I think you and others on the panel have been advocating for and wrestling with AI, is a problem within philanthropy itself. The money and the power within foundations exists on the programmatic teams. The knowledge about AI exists on the operations teams and the tech staff. So just yesterday I got a call from a major funder in the US. The CTO called me and said, program person invited me to a call to ask if I should fund this AI thing. They don't know, so they asked me, and then that person called me to find out what they should do. So the sector struggles to build our own capacity and knowledge in an intersectional, multidisciplinary way to understand how to wrestle with AI. So what do we do about that? How do we build capacity and change culture within philanthropy to be ready to wrestle with and fund what we find ourselves in right now in the age of AI?
Wow. I do not know. I'd love to help. What I think is interesting is that we're getting more demand, for instance, from the M&A sector, mergers and acquisitions. Like the private sector is realizing when they put money into something, they want to audit that something, and they want to make sure that they're putting the money in something that will not explode in their faces. And we're not getting any requests from philanthropies. Like there's so many things that other organizations similar in size, not in mission, but similar in size and operation and being complex organizations, are realizing that there's challenges that need to be addressed right now. I don't think that the philanthropy sector can afford to be slow. I think it's a matter of doing things well. And I don't think that doing things slowly will lead to better outcomes. You need to focus right now on doing things well and doing it responsibly. And what does that mean for your organization? But really, I think that if you take it slow, that means more people suffering. We just cannot afford that. So if there's a gap between operations and programs, bridge that gap yesterday, because we can't afford to have it. And that's happened everywhere. Like we've worked with so many organizations where that was the issue. Like bias was a compliance issue, but solving it was a product team issue, and they didn't talk to one another. So that, companies are having to also manage that and change the ways that they work. Engineering teams working with quantitative social scientists, that's not an easy thing to change in the culture of an organization, but they're having to do it because the quality of what they do depends on it. I think that philanthropy needs to understand that the quality of your impact on the world will depend on you being able to tackle and address that.
Yeah, if I can offer one add-on to that, I don't think the problem you're describing is unique to philanthropy, and you didn't say that, but I just want to point that out. So in my experience working in standards organizations, it's kind of the same right now. It's like, again, technologists, standards writers, executives coming to the table with solutions, but they actually aren't using generative AI in their day-to-day, even to take notes or even to turn on the little button in Microsoft Teams. Sometimes because they don't trust it. They're like, I don't need this. So if you're someone who doesn't feel you need it and you don't have firsthand experience with it, you really shouldn't be making decisions about what technical course or what funding course to take. So I think maybe there's a gap in your staff and in mine and in so many others, which requires a new skill set that only my daughter has, which you should. But in seriousness, like I do think that there is a missing skill set. It's easy to say bridge the gap, but your question is really with whom and who has the skills to do that. And it may not be changing the power dynamics, but it may be allowing people, and I see this even in the US Congress of all places, staffers who have been hired specifically because of their AI expertise, not only in an academic discipline, because they're users of these technologies, they have firsthand experience. And maybe there's a staff position required to inform decision makers based on that. And over time, I do think we'll all be using AI, but it's early and people making decisions are not using it.
Andrea, any last comments you want to jump in on with this question or the previous one?
Well, I'll tell a story about different philanthropy, that philanthropy is not a monolith, but that I think reinforces my earlier point. And, there are some foundations that, maybe were, founded by industrial giants who now have independent boards that are, really investing robustly in, social movements and civil society engagement. But about 10 years ago, a group of workers and I had an idea of using AI to build a tool for workers to be able to enforce their rights via a phone app. And the truth is that AI was not at the point that it worked. We used it, it was clunky and we didn't succeed. But I met at a conference a program director of a major tech corporate connected philanthropic arm who was like, that is such a good idea. How much money do you need? And I said, well, this is what we could do with $500,000. He said, well, what could you do for $1 million? I wrote a proposal. I was all excited, and I got a sheepish call a week later saying, I'm so sorry, but the C-suite of the company vetoed it because you guys are aggressive around demands on the corporation, and we didn't get the money. And and again, and this is what my point is around the discomfort, right? Like the power asymmetries are so profound, and that maybe on the immediate level it is uncomfortable, but the implications for society, for us not redistributing resources so that workers can build ideas for themselves around how to use AI and technologies, for example, like we are missing an opportunity to get everybody together, and people will embrace technology more if they are a part of shaping how it comes into their lives. So it is in the long run interest to be willing to sit with that discomfort, to be able to resource things that that really give workers and communities a role in shaping all of this.
All right, thanks so much, everybody. The lights have gone down. The countdown clock has started counting up, which I think means our time is up, but this is a great set of themes to continue through the rest of the afternoon. Thank you so much for the questions, and thank you also to our speakers.